Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Scott Stedman podcast. We're so thankful that you are here and listening to us. We've appreciated all the love that you have supported the show, especially as of late. But if you listened last week, we did kind of a fun little thing about if Mike was the general director and what some things that he would do, what he would try to tackle as the general director. This episode, he's going to be asking me
You're in the
questions.
hot seat.
I'm in the hot seat. But good news is I may have a little bit of pressure off me now because Church of God Ministries has just announced that we have an interim director. Monte Dillard is the new interim director of Church of God. He's going to be here for, I think, 2 years as they're trying to find the next general director. And he's going to try to help navigate the transition, try to, at least from the email that we got when they were searching for an interim director, try to maybe patch up some holes, maybe try to get a little bit more of a stronger structure within the organization of the Church of God before the new general director takes place. But I thought, so that's exciting news. We didn't have to wait for like 2 more years before that was announced. So that's great. So definitely blessings to Monte and the great luck that he's in the journey he's going to have to endure to be the next to kind of pave the way for the next general director of the
I'm kind
Church
of
of God.
curious what power he has as an interim.
That's very, I mean,
Because like when you're
yeah.
an interim pastor in a local church, you show up, you preach, you kind of navigate the transition to a new pastor, but you don't have a lot of say in stuff like purchases and
Yeah.
budget and things that maybe change within the building and the structure of the church itself. You're just there to kind of be quote unquote what an interim is, which is somebody to kind of hold the fort down while they find the next person.
Yeah, I think if I understand a little bit of what he might be doing, and this may be like a Jeanette question, since she's more in tune with the whole interim process through churches and even through organizations. Um, I think he has some power to be able to make suggestions on and make approval, like, hey, I think this change needs to happen. You guys, I really think you guys should do that. At the end of the day, it's the governing teams that have to vote for it, or at least in the case of the Church of God, it may, depending on how big it is, it might have to go to GA to be approved on if there's going to be any type of leadership or structural changes. But I think if there's anything about, hey, maybe we should consolidate this team or expand this team or do this or do that, I think probably the local teams, like the local governing teams there, can probably make those decisions as long as they're not too big that needs the General Assembly to weigh in on it. Um, so before we dive in, because I know Micah's burning to ask me all these questions about what if it mean if I was the general director of the Church of God, we actually have a lot of comments and a lot of emails from people about, and I haven't been checking it recently, so I'm going to go through these. So the first one was commented on episode 257 on why men still hate going to church. And Electric Shadow wrote, during the 2024 presidential election, the Democrats made this stupid ad slash commercial trying to reach out to men. It contained a bunch of stereotypes and caricatures of men, and it didn't hide its true agenda and motives behind it. The church often takes this exact same approach when trying to attract men into their congregation. They use stereotypes to appeal to us without talking to us or asking us what we really want. Men aren't fools. We know when people or entities have ulterior motives. Thoughts on that comment, Micah? I know I caught you in mid chew. I do apologize.
That's okay. I'm just thinking, like, when did we record that episode?
About a month ago. Actually, it's been a while ago because we're on episode. This is episode 271, and that episode was Yeah, 257. So it's been a while. But this person
Um,
must have seen it a month ago and commented on it. So,
I think that like the listener may be right in a way
oh yeah,
because
absolutely.
I've served on staff at churches where it's like, oh, we gotta appeal to this group, and we gotta appeal to that group, and we gotta, you know, you know,
And
this isn't a stories gone wild or anything, but like we would be sitting in the church lobby at the church I worked in at the time, and it was like the pastor would get up and be like, "Do we know them? Do we know them?" And like if they were new to the church, it was almost like we bum rushed them at the door because we wanted them to come to church there permanently, so that they would
yeah,
give and so that they would be a part and so that they, would grow our numbers. And so, yes, I think to a degree there is a plan, quote unquote, plan in place
yeah. And I
to steer
also think
people's.
too, and I also think too, when you think about the role of men's ministry, like I know there's a couple times with these big national men's ministry where they have like monster trucks and flamethrowers and all these
Cowboys,
like cowboys and
rodeos.
or I think even like a tank comes out and there's people marching around with AK-47s at a church men's conference. I don't know. I
I
probably
went
made
to a
that
church where a guy and a horse came out in the middle of the venue.
Uh, oh, well, but I mean, but that's the thing. I feel like when it comes to men, we always think, well, this is what men want. So let's do a special Super Bowl Sunday church service event. Let's try to do a men's ministry where we're doing a cookout and we're doing a barbecue and grilling, which there's nothing wrong with that. But at the same time, if you're just doing something to appease men, but you're actually not getting to know who they are, what they do, what their passions are in life. Because I mean, I could talk to a guy, and if he's like, let's say he's a counselor, he may be more kind of, I want to try to do something in the church that's going to help people. Or maybe can we do something where we can offer like free counseling services? I can get my team, we can do something like that and kind of appeal to the things that they're doing or the things that they're passionate about or the things that they're trained to do versus like, hey, you want to come to our our barbecue social? Like, that doesn't seem to take place. And I think a lot of it is trying to build those relationships. And I think a lot of times when you think about not necessarily with and again, I don't mean this to sound bad, but when you have a new woman or a new family coming to the church, usually you'll see like the women with kids or the mothers. If they notice their mother, they'll talk to her, they'll get and they start to kind of they'll start to have they have that common thing, raising kids as moms. Not saying that dad don't raise kids, dads do raise kids, but I think somehow there's always that thing where they can kind of talk a little bit about that, where men more want to talk about, hey, my son plays football. The everyday raising the kids, doing laundry, cooking meals, taking them to their appointments, and having someone to talk about the stress of all that is different from men because men want to talk about, oh yeah, I'm stressed out because my son doesn't want to play basketball anymore. And I feel like a lot of times when it comes to the family roles, they're always different and they're not very stereotypical in that sort of sense. Like you could go up to a dad, you could talk about raising kids, and he may actually respond to that versus, oh, what do you do? Oh, you like NASCAR? Like that, I think kind of deviates.
Well,
So
it's
in a
certainly not
way,
as traditional, like you're talking about family roles. It's
oh
certainly
yeah,
not as traditional in 2025 as when we were kids.
yeah. Um, Yeah, one person mentioned when we talked about the understanding and navigating church scandals, one episode 269. Someone more of a comment to you, Micah, said sorry for your loss in regards to your grandmother passing. And then the
Appreciate
other
that.
one And then the other one from the same episode, 269, Understanding and Navigating Church Scandals, they write, most religious leaders and workers are above reproach and are truly dedicated to their work. Unfortunately, the scale and frequency of church scandals being exposed has grown exponentially in recent times. The fact that you have to educate religious workers about child safety shows that the church isn't safe. It should be unheard of that people are exploited in religion. Um, and I mean, again, I can't argue with that, like, because the fact that we do have to have like training for child safety to know what proper protocol is. Unfortunately, we have to go there because that's where we are now. Because unfortunately, church abuse, church scandals, especially when it comes to children, has been around for decades.
Mhm.
And the fact, at least from when we can go as far back as people were reporting it, or at least when people were exposing it, like newspapers and stuff. But yeah, it's been um, it's been wild, and especially now when you watch documentaries going back to like things that happened in the 60s and the 50s, and you realize,
It's like
oh, there's a
haunting.
it is. It's like all this stuff that's happening, and you're like, well, no wonder we had to have these guardrails in places because we want to make sure that kids are protected. And but I also get the so for me, I'm kind of torn because it's like, well, we have to have that stuff so that people know what the right protocol is. Not even questioning their hearts, but it's like, hey, as an adult, you shouldn't be alone in a room with a child, regardless if it's your child or not. Especially if it's not your child, then you shouldn't be in alone with them as an adult, especially if you're not a family member. Like that, I mean, that's something I don't think we should have to say, but we have to say it because too many times, especially with the whole Robert Morris thing, hey, somehow he's this person who, like you asked, how do they have time to even abuse children? And it's like, well, I don't know, but apparently they must not have some safeguards to really make sure. It's like, oh, well, this kid's going in pastor's office. That's okay because he's pastor. He's above reproach. Pastor's not going to do anything wrong or evil or sinful. And unfortunately, that does happen. Um, so yeah, I mean, it's a very good point. It's a very good point, and that's kind of where we're at now. And I'm thankfully that I just have to teach it once, and everyone knows it, and we don't have any issues. But in some cases, I just also don't like teaching it as well because it's like, well, hopefully people should be, again, that idea that if people are truly immersed into Jesus and his kingdom, then they probably wouldn't be having the thoughts or the ideas to harm children. But yeah. So that's it for mail, for all the mail
Mail
stuffs.
call.
So, Micah, it is now your turn to drill me about if I was the general director of the Church of God, what would be some things that I would do, my first year, or things that you would ask me on things that I would want to try to accomplish during that time. So take it
Sure.
away. It's all the floor is yours.
I yield.
Oh my god. You're like, I don't know
I
what's
yield.
coming out of Scott's mouth. Oh man.
Um, Similar to like a president
Mhm,
of the United States, you know how they talk a lot about what's their first 100 days going to look
mhm.
like with their new administration. What is your first 100 days as general director going to look like?
All right. Well, I think that my first 100 days is I have to get to know my teams.
Are you
I have
going
to
to
get
have a
to
new team? Are you going to,
Well, here's the
are you going to
thing.
hire new folks? Are you going to change the way that things look? Are you going to stay in Anderson? Are you going to, yeah,
Well, I think that's even a harder question because right now, like what we have, our general offices are in Indianapolis,
yep, not even in
correct?
Anderson anymore.
Not even Anderson anymore. So there's a part of me that goes, okay, and I think it also depends on my job. Like if I'm the type of director that really cares about pastors and churches, and that's like my big thing about pastoral care, then I probably want to stay in Indianapolis because I'm close to the airport. I can get on a plane, I can fly
Wherever.
anywhere, wherever, and get to where I need to go to, check out churches, minister with state ministers, do all that stuff. I'm very close. Same thing, like I'm only 5-10 minutes away from the Columbus airport. So if I need to get on a plane and get somewhere, it's not I don't have to commute that far. I can get up, I can go, my wife can drop me off and drive the car back, or we could park the car somewhere. I could go back and
You
it
could
takes me
walk.
I could hitchhike, I could Uber. It's not going to cost me an arm and leg to Uber because I'm literally 5 minutes.
You didn't like
Um,
the walking option?
I do, but it's also there's a lot of construction right there where the intersection is to get to the airport, and I
Well, I
really
was
don't
also
want to
going to
mess with
say it'd
that.
probably a pain carrying luggage walking to the airport, and
Yeah.
even if it's
Um,
not that far away.
yeah, so I think, but at the same time, I also, as far as changing teams, I don't know that answer. Here's the thing about changing teams. I feel like a lot of times when people come in, they want to change their teams quickly because they want to get the people that they know, they trust. At the same time, I feel like when you're constantly changing team, you're always losing something. There's always someone there who's been there for a while, who kind of knows the system, and I kind of knows the setup. So when I remove that person to put my person in there, that person now has to figure out the older system before we can adopt the newer system or a newer way of doing something. So part of me is when I come in, I'm not ready to like start throwing my weight around and start removing people and hiring people. To me, it's like, let me see what I have. Let me kind of understand what they do and what the procedure and policies and the structure is. And from there, I can make changes, say, hey, we're going to do it this way. And if they're willing to make that change and can do it effectively, then great. If they're to the point where it's like, well, if they want to argue with me, like, well, that's not the way we've done it. We've always done it this way. Then it's like, okay, well, it hasn't been effective because obviously we're kind of doing this as a denomination. So we want to do this. Um,
Did you just say the D word as a general director?
I did. I did. Well, Jim said it too. So I'm not going to
Apologize.
I'm not going to apologize to that. The other thing is, I think the first 100 days is understanding how we operate from a national level to a state level to a regional level. I guess from national to state to international, and how that flows into the local church. Because what you and I have been talking about with some of these things, it seems like there's always miscommunication. It seems like no one really knows what they need to do. And even when something does happen and the people at national find out about it, they're kind of shocked, like, oh, what the heck? This isn't supposed to happen. This isn't how it's supposed to work. And it's like, well, do the people in the state know that? Do the people who are your leadership know that? Because obviously
Districts?
the districts, like apparently there's a lot of miscommunication. So we're not aligned as far as a leadership, as far as a governing leadership. So part of me is just trying to figure out where's the fractures and the breaks within the skeletal structure of Church of God leadership, and trying to figure out a better way to patch that. Either if I have to patch it up, or we just have to go with the new model, which I think that's something that Monte's going to be dealing with. Um,
Yep.
as interim. But that's going to be the second, like the next big thing that I'm going to tackle is how do we as an organization run smooth, and how does that benefit our state leaders, our district leaders, and our international leaders? Because we really need to have we need to make sure that this big machine that we call the Church of God is running as smoothly as possible. And there's always going to be a couple of issues with that. But if we have a good bone structure, then even when we have some fractures and breaks, we can take some time to heal up, and then we can get back going because we know that the body is moving forward and we're not just laying on a gurney somewhere. Um, so I think that's our thing. The other thing is the next thing is I'm going to be looking more at our financial budget and really kind of understanding where the money flows is in and out from, and what's going to what. And I think the reason why I asked that, because since I've been away from being in leadership within the Church of God and being in leadership in a different denomination, I've been able to see how this particular denomination is able to not only run, but also how they treat their local churches and pastors from a state level. So part of me goes, okay, if you as a minister are paying X amount of dollars to be in our yearbook, to be a registered minister within the Church of God, instead of just saying thank you, your name's in a book, and that's the extent of it, what are some other benefits I can give you as a pastor?
Mhm.
So for an example, like when the UMC pays their dues, and I'm not sure they have a technical name for it, I mean, already pastors who are, if you're already an ordained minister within the UMC, you're already in a pension plan, so you don't have to like pay into it. You're automatically in it. Part of your dues goes to that pension plan. You already have health insurance, unless you decide to opt out. So you automatically have health insurance too, which I know the Church of God tried to do that. And I know there was some talk about it. I don't know if they still do, because I know before it was really expensive, especially if you're a small church pastor or a bivocational minister. There's no way you're going to pay that much money to be in the health insurance. It just wasn't happening. Um,
I think
but
a lot of it
then
has to do with being an independent contractor.
yeah,
Essentially,
and
is what
then
you are.
yeah, and then the second thing that we got was we would get a printout from some type of like survey group that told us within a 5 mile radius, kind of gave us a breakdown of the type of income people have, a makeup of men and women, married, divorced, single. Like it was almost like a stuff that you would get from the census, right? From the US
Mhm.
Census. It's a thing of how has your community changed within the last year or last 2 years. So then that way, this equips me to understand, okay, how can I do ministry to the people within my community in a 5 mile radius? And I think sometimes that's helpful because, instead of getting caught in a trap, like, well, we're going to do the same old thing, or we're always known for our spaghetti dinners. Well, guess what? Maybe people in your community don't want spaghetti dinners.
Mhm.
Maybe there's another issue. Maybe what they want is they maybe need childcare. Can you provide childcare so mom and dad can go out on a date? Or mom and dad can go do grocery shopping because they don't want to have to take their kids screaming in a thing. Like, so I think sometimes that can be helpful too. I think the other thing is when it comes to leadership training, I know, can you get you know, does a pastor's membership, can I work something out with other organizations where they can get access to like Barna Plus, where they can look at the most up-to-date research of church trends, so that can help them navigate how to be a better leader, or give them like, I don't know, like a Right Now Media subscription so they can access thousands of Bible study material, all because they paid their dues as a pastor and the church paid their dues as their church thing. And plus you get the 501c3, because right now it seems like anytime I get my thing, it's like, oh, 501c3, like that's like the best prize in the world. But for some of us, I think we probably need a little bit more. Maybe we need a little bit more help, or maybe we need a little bit more accountability or training. So I think in the first 100 days, I really want to focus on how are we structured? How are we structured as an organization? Get to know my teams and see if I do need to like pivot or switch people out. And then also, how are we going to take care of our local churches and ministers? Because at the end of the day, it's the local churches that are giving to the national office. So if I've kind of completely ignored them, I've completely ignored my base. If I completely ignore
Mhm.
my base, then we're never going to get fixed any type of financial failings that we're having.
Well, some would argue that that's where we are now.
Oh, yeah, I agree.
And I don't just say some, I lightly. I just, but anyway, that's a separate conversation for another day.
Yeah. All right. Next
Um,
question.
that's well, before I get to that, I think that there's a lot, that's a lot of, I don't remember what I said because you haven't published that episode yet, but that's some really good stuff, Scott. Like, I think that leadership training and you set a subscription to Right Now Media. Like, I also think of like things like CMG, which is Church Motion Graphics,
Mm-hmm.
or churchmedia.org or whatever it is, where churches can have access to like bumper videos and
Oh,
motion backgrounds and all these things that would help enhance your media experience when you go into a church. And a lot of that stuff isn't super expensive, but a lot of churches can't afford it or they don't know about it because they just don't know what they don't know. So anyway,
yeah.
um, and I think it's smart to go in and not fire folks or let people go or force people out or whatever, because you got to really, that could just set the tone for a really, really bad. environment, toxic
Hmm.
work environment, run as a general director, things like that. So, moving on, how are you, as general director and part of the, the Church of God team, leader of the Church of God team, gonna reach the next generation for Christ, especially in a world where we have smartphones, AI, social media, whether it's YouTube, TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, things like that, and meet folks where they are, because you and I are from a generation that was very much missed in that regard, because we went to college. And by the way, we may come back, we may not. And so, um, speaking to that a little bit, as far as reaching another generation for Christ and for the church, and using social media and other technological means to do so.
Well, I think the big thing with social media is it gives us an opportunity to tell us about our brand, who we are, what we believe, what we
Can I
do.
whisper
So,
something really quick?
yeah, go ahead.
It's free. The majority of social media platforms are free.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So I think and again, I think a lot of it goes back to, since social media is such an important thing, and not just Facebook, I'm talking about Facebook, X, Blue Sky, Instagram,
Instagram,
TikTok. Um, I mean, there's so many different social media platforms that I
YouTube.
YouTube. So I think a lot of times when it comes to really hitting our branding, we need to make sure that we are consistent with our messaging. And that
Mhm.
can mean a couple things. Like it could just be something just like, hey, I know occasionally like, there'd be like a little heritage song that gets posted up like, oh, D. Otis wrote this hymn back in 19th thing. Okay, that gets a lot of likes and stuff. But I'm talking more about, hey, here's who we are. And if it could just be a stock image of this is what we believe about the Holy Spirit. It could just be a video message from the general director saying, hey, this is who we are. But especially when it comes to younger generations, I think there always has to be something geared to them. Whether it's, I mean, and I think one of the missed opportunities from the national office being moved down to Indianapolis is that you have students literally outside your offices, your future leaders, whether they're in the medical field, whether they're in the art field, music, religion, social work. So the fact that I can go, and I know a lot of that might be Anderson University branding, but especially some of them are like, if they're on a scholarships because they're a Church of God kid or they're a Church of God PK or the whatever. I want them to come in. I want them to talk about how God is using them to pursue their dreams or to pursue their field. And and I think the church, and I would want to make sure that whoever my social media team, if I don't have a good social media team, or if I have one person who's my social media person, I'm probably going to have to increase that because there's so many different platforms. We have to do film production, do that, and make sure we have a social media calendar that says, hey, on Mondays we can put like a little thing about what was, you know, how was your church service this past Sunday? Something very general to get people talking. Tuesday could be like a heritage thing. Wednesday could be a testimony thing. We're from a student. Um, then Thursday we could also put some stuff about events or news that's coming up, and even kind of make it out like, hey, states, we want to make sure that if you're doing something good in your region or your state, we want to put it out because sometimes I mean, as much as Micah, you and I have talked about how Anderson, the Church of God Facebook group, sometimes doesn't put a lot of stuff out there unless there's like a town hall or unless we have to, or there's some type of issue out there that's causing people to panic. And now we're going to say something to put out a fire. Um, but it still has a presence, right? It still has a pretty good presence where maybe some of your state or regional sites do not have a presence. So I
Mhm.
think in twofold, if just say like if Ohio Ministries says, hey, we're having we have these fall festivals where where people come, we go to a Der Dutchman and we eat pie and we listen to gospel music. Like we have this event going on. Hey, if it's over towards like the west side of Ohio, maybe some Indiana folks might want to make the trek too. It's not maybe an hour and a half away, right? So, but at the same time, maybe someone in Ohio who follows the Church of God page but doesn't follow Ohio Ministries, they see that and they kind of know, and I can put a link Ohio Ministries so that they know to follow that page as well. Or I can send a team if like Florida doesn't have a good social media site. I now have a team that can kind of help them build their social media site. I mean, we won't maintain it. We'll help them build it and say, hey, here's what you need. Here's some things to think of. Here's kind of an example of a calendar that you should do to kind of help make sure that you're staying relevant so that people are noticing you and that it's always in
And let's
people's
follow up in a year
feed.
and see how we're doing.
And let's follow up in a year, see how you're doing it, what resources you need and whatnot. And I think that's going to help too, with just trying to be more engagement, because I think even not only and also just kind of always be aware of other trends, because right now TikTok's hot, Instagram's still always hot. But I mean, when
Snapchat.
TikTok got Snapchat, but like even when TikTok was shut down, I mean, there's a bunch of other ones, Clapper, and I know Lemonade's part of the TikTok community, but there's a whole other bunch of different sites that people are trying to these like startup social media things we're trying to get in, and it's like, okay, like, is this something that's going to take off? Is this just a fad that's going to die down that none of our audience is doing it? And even look at software like there's a great site called Vista Social. I mean, it's a paid service, but you can link up all your social media sites from YouTube all the way up to like Facebook, and I could do a post, and I can hit a button that my post will go to every single one of those platforms. Or if I want
Mhm.
to be more specific, I can like check off like, oh, well, I don't want this to go to TikTok because it's not relevant to that audience. So I need to tailor this a little bit different because my, maybe I have like 500 characters, but TikTok's only giving me 280. So I might have to specifically go to the TikTok thing and rewrite it to tailor it to fit within the character count, and then go from there and then just hit send or schedule. And it does all of it. And then, I just have to take maybe a day to get all that stuff scheduled, have it scheduled for the week. And then I click a button, and then as stuff. So then as far as like, if I have somebody who is a social media person at the national office, maybe Monday they're just doing scheduled posts for that week or next 2 weeks. And then the rest of that time, unless there's like an emergency that needs to get posted up quickly, they can start helping other ministries, state ministries, regional ministries, like auxiliary ministries, to be able to help if they need help with their social media thing. To just be available to give advice or to help them with resources. I'm not sure if I answered all your questions. That was a lot of words coming out
Well,
of my mouth.
well, you had mentioned one of the, what was was it Vista what?
Vista Social.
Yeah, there's another one called Hootsuite,
Hootsuite's
and
another one. Yep.
it logs into all your platforms and you're able to schedule out and post things at the same time. Um, for the most part, you answered it, but with respect to reaching the next generation
Mm-hmm.
and keeping connected with younger folks, how would you do that? Other than just like posting on the CHOG pages
Yeah.
and keeping things up to date in respect to church things.
Yeah, I think for them using social media to let the younger generation know about leadership opportunities. I mean, I know in Ohio we have 3SLI that's done by Andy Hoover, which has been fantastic. But especially if
Mhm.
you have a student that lives all the way out in California, maybe they're not coming to 3SLI because they don't want to have to fly and pay
Sure.
the airfare. So is there a way? So is there a local Church of God group over on the West Coast that does leadership stuff that can be a benefit to those students in leadership? To be, and not only that, can I also do something for kids like maybe some juniors or seniors in high school? Say, hey, we're offering some internships to work at Ohio or to work at our ministries here at Anderson. And if you're interested, we want you to do a part. And then this is not only going to be kind of a leadership training, so you kind of understand what we're doing and how we train leaders, current leaders and next leaders, but then even give them an opportunity or incentive like, hey, we're going to give you a scholarship to a Church of God school
Mhm.
because you're part of this program.
Which helps
Or
enrollment for our
which
Church of
helps
God
enroll, which
schools.
again, it helps enrollment. And then even like if there's nothing on the West Coast, I can call Andy Hoover and I'll be like, hey, is there a way for students to access your stuff through a live stream? Because there's a lot of
Yeah.
students who can't do it because of cost effectiveness. Can we do that? Can we put a price on that? Can we do a package? And then again, that's going to get, and I think in some ways, I don't know how enrollment is at 3SLI, but let's say it's dropping because, time and everything seems to be dropping. But now that I have students who maybe phoning in, or maybe even some of our missionaries who are training these young men and women who are youth, or maybe even just college age students to be leaders, and they can go and participate in 3SLI from across the ocean. And then that gets them invested. Maybe that gets them to say, hey, I like this leadership thing. I want to go to, and then of course, we put that advertising for Mid America, Warner Pacific, Anderson, all the other, you know, Church of God universities. And then that way, that gives them more enrollment to kind of come in here. Like, I'm interested in going to Anderson, or I'm interested in going to Mid America because I was at 3SLI. They're able to broadcast it. And again, it shows that we care about them, that we're willing to do whatever we can or sacrifice whatever we can so that people who can't physically drive down or pay the full price to come to a youth leadership conference can still be a part of it, and not just, hey, here's a live stream, watch it, but make it a little bit more interactive too. Hey, after that, we're gonna put you in this chat forum, or we're gonna put you in this group, or we're gonna put you in this like Zoom with the groups there, and then you guys are going to kind of talk a little bit about too. So it's kind of like a cluster group, and then we may have like a couple of leaders who might oversee that, whether they're part of SLI or maybe they're just part of the Church of God, who can kind of oversee these groups and kind of help them lead and ask questions and kind of do that as a smaller group because they can't get there, so they can do it digitally as well. And I think that's another aspect that we can probably do as well to really engage and try to train young leadership instead of when I was the train leader, it was more of like, all these pastors are going to be retiring and we'll have no one to run the church. So we need young leaders. It's an emergency.
And then we get out of Bible college or seminary and there's no jobs.
And there's no job because they didn't retire.
Or Ministry Connector didn't work.
Oh, jeez. Well, let's not talk about Ministry Connector unless that's going to be your next question.
Scott, is Ministry Connector coming back as general director?
No Ministry Connectors
Okay,
coming back.
I really wasn't going to ask that question. I actually have two more as we
Okay.
wrap up this interview time together. The first one is the Church of God, not only the Church of God, but the church just nationwide, all over the world, faces a lot of challenges, whether it's division, whether it's racial problems, whether it's LGBTQ inclusion, DEI, um, things that honestly I think that people are scared to just talk about. What, how are you going to navigate some of those problems? I don't even want to call them problems, but conversations as they arise. And I know that towards the end of Jim's tenure, the Chaga Firm thing was a big deal. Abortion is another one that comes to mind, and all the states are doing different things now. And education is another one that's coming up. I know that Ohio just passed a Senate bill, and so the DEI stuff is going away as a result. Um, what do you, as general director, have to say in respect to like those difficult conversations? And granted, you can't. I mean, you could speak into them, but you can't make decisions. At least that's what we think
Yeah.
because of the way things are set up.
I think so. Yeah. So I think there's kind of a two-parter to that. I think I'm going to split that up into two parts. I think there's stuff on how do we as a church handle the conflict we see within our communities and within our world, and how do we as the Church of God deal with conflict or challenges within the movement or denomination. I think those are So I'm going to kind of separate those. So when it comes culturally, let's talk about culture, the world. I think whenever there's a big hot topic issue or some type of challenge, I think a lot of times there has to be something said. And I think a lot of times, I think a lot of times Jim's approach to it was more of, okay, here's all this violence that's happening, especially when it comes to like, the Me Too movement or Black Lives Matter, about 5 to 7 years ago. I think his approach was more of, I'm going to just put something like, oh, this is tragic. And then I'm going to get a team together, wait to get video cameras. Let's polish something. And we're going to go and we're going to address this head on. And I think, even though I appreciate the high quality of all those videos, because they're very well thoughtful, very informative, and very polished to the point where they look good, they look professional. On the other side of that coin, living in a social media world, you have to respond to stuff quickly because your silence ends up allowing more people to speak for you. And especially if you are the general director of a denomination and there's this big thing and you have people within your own denomination who have different opinions about how to view these world events and you stay silent, then all of a
Well,
sudden
not
you're
only
going to
that,
have,
Scott, like you talk about stuff going so quickly in social media, like if you don't respond and remain silent, they're on to the next thing.
yeah, they're on to the
Stuff
next
happens so
big
quickly in
crisis.
this world.
Yeah. So I think a lot of times even, so, let's say, so even if in the event where initially something happens like the George Floyd thing happens, as general director, I would put something like, it's very troubling to see the events that are coming out of Minnesota right now. And, I think we should pray for all the parties involved. I think we also have to remember that all life is precious, that God created everything and everything he created was good. And even though we don't know all the details about everything that had happened from that, we just need to pray that God is able to move in that thing to bring healing to the brokenness and to help bring justice to the injustice. And maybe that's the first thing I say as something that I'm responding to it. And then hopefully as more, if there's, and then again, if that's it, and then we're on to the next thing. But I think it's one of those things that when something like that happens, I think also there has to be a point where, like, and let's say it's not the George Floyd thing, but then we see the Breonna Taylor, or we see some other stuff of people of color being mistreated and injustice happening to it. Then that's when we're going to have to speak, not just on that specific topic, but how do we as a church deal with racial reconciliation? How do we as a church deal when there's injustice happening in our community? What do we need to do? How do we
And how do we
respond
come
to that?
together?
And how do we come together in that? And then that would be me of saying, okay, I'm going to go call someone from the National Association, say, hey, will you be willing to be on this talk with me and not do something polished. I'm not going to try to fly you out and let's sit down and have our couch. I mean, I know our podcast is very primitive because it's just you and me on a Zoom call, but I feel like it's something like that to get stuff out quickly. Just me talking with like the president of the National Association at that time, trying to figure this out. How do we move forward? How do we find unity? How do we do all this? And maybe a couple other people. So we have like 4 or 6 people and do kind of like a digital roundtable. So that way people can tune in, people can see, and then we can even say, here is our stance. We need to be like this. Here's what we need to do. Here's how we need to do to kind of go forward together. And I think when it comes to worldly events, community events, that's the one thing we're going to have to kind of really try to navigate. On the
Thankfully.
second time, when it comes to issues within our denomination, that is something that has to be dealt with quickly. Because just as much as people are on to the next one, when it's something within the Church of God, it can become, if it's not put out quickly, then that little tiny spark's going to turn into a wildfire and everyone's going to get burned. So, you brought up the whole thing with Cog Affirm. That was a big thing that happened, last year, 2 years ago. 2 years ago when all that went down. It's so for me, if something like that happened, I would first kind of say, hey, obviously, and I wouldn't even just make it ambiguous. Hey, there's a group out there called Cog Affirm. They are made up of people who are who are either members who at least were former members of the Church of God, current members of the Church of God, or they're like, they're ordained ministers of the Church of God who eventually are calling for the church to be more mindful of the LGBTQIA community. And I think, and mainly just kind of explaining, here's what they want to do, here's kind of their plan. And from the conversation you and I had with them, the big plan wasn't to try to have LGBTQIA ministers. That was never part of the plan from all those conversations. They even admit if we tried to even send something to GA, it would get shot down immediately because, that they know that. So it's like, okay. But their whole thing was, let's try to be more open to our churches being safe places for LGBTQIA. And if that's if that's the messaging, then that's the thing that needs to be addressed. And that's the thing. This is what it is. So let's bring up any clarity. What this means is, can we as a church provide safe spaces for that community? It's not, and even would say this is not about having LGBTQI leadership within the Church of God or anything else like that. It's about safe spaces. And then if I can make that clear and communicate that clear, then that's it. If it does get to the point where there are people who are calling for the Church of God to hire LGBTQ ministers or to ordain them, then that's when I would say, okay, as of right now, according to the Church of God bylaws, according to our view of human sexuality, here's what it states. It states that marriage is between one man and one woman. And that's kind of how everything that flows from that, as far as our leadership, falls based on that, the core view of human sexuality. Now, with that being said, if you believe that that is something that that needs to be changed, first we need to have a conversation about biblical reasoning on why that is, because that's kind of part of our whole movement. We need to sit down with people and we need to really study the scriptures and kind of do that. At the same time, it also needs to be something that has to be approved by the General Assembly. And here's how here are the steps that you can take to make that happen, or to try to see if that legislation can get on the ballot to be voted on. And then after all that, if there's still people who are saying, hey, I think the Church of God should do this, and if not, then I'm leaving the Church of God, or I'm a minister and I'm leaving, right? Then here's what I would say. If you are a minister of the Church of God and you do not agree with this theology or this policy or the way we govern ourselves based on this particular issue, and you don't like that you brought it up before the credentialing board, or you brought it up before the General Assembly and it got voted down and you're upset by that, totally understand. That's just part of the process of trying to be a community, be a family. We're not always going to agree on certain things. However, if you feel like that this has been such a grievance towards you that you want to leave the denomination or to leave the movement, then we want to make sure that we can do on our part, be as humbly and as careful as project to be able to move your credentials over to another denomination that fits with your ideas and your with your ideas and your theology and your praxis on these certain topics. And then the ball's back in their court. If you're just blowing smoke, cool, blow smoke. But here's the way you can do it. And if you say, you know what, I want to go to the UMC, I want to go to the CCC, or I want to go to the Southern Baptist, or whatever the case be, great. You let us know who the credential person over in your regional or your state Southern Baptist convention or with the UMC, and we will gladly transfer your credentials and all your information over them. And we'll even write a glowing letter review and do it that way, and just be very kind and peaceful and caring and humble about it. Because at the end of
Yeah.
the day, as general director, I want to address things and I want to also have a clear plan of what we're going to do after that. Because if I don't have any clarity and I don't have a clear plan and we don't have a clear way of how to navigate these things, then that not only allows for rumors to go abroad, not only the rumors go about, but then we're also not dealing with the chirpiness and the gossip and everything else. Because if anything, that's the stuff that's always going to continue to divide. But if I can give a clear, good thing, and even if I give clear instructions and people are still confused or they still don't know and they bring up another question, thank you for that. Let's go and revisit that. Let me try to make that a little bit more clear on how we're going to do that. Or let my team, let the credentialing team take care of it and try to make that aspect a little bit more clearing on what to do when it comes to transferring your credentials if you don't agree with kind of where the Church of God's heading as far as its credentials manual and its beliefs.
That was a lot.
It was a lot, but I feel like it had to be broken down because there's just a
I know
lot
that
and
could
you
have
have
been
to
an
deal with
episode.
it.
That could have been an episode in itself.
Yeah, I hear you.
Um, Last question. It could be a short answer if you want it to be. Um, as a general director, you know that there's a lot of travel, a lot of responsibility, a lot of appearances, a lot of things like that. And as a young family man, how are you going to balance the travel, the appearances, and making sure your family's good?
Mm.
Because Jim, when he stepped into the role, his kids were grown.
Yeah. And I think, oh man, well, to be honest, it really depends on budget. And here's why I say budget, why that all depends on budget. Because if we have enough budget or we're able to make some moves or consolidate certain things where I, as general director, don't have to travel all the time and be places, but I can have people like
Do
a
it.
assistant general director who can kind of be the extension of the general director. So, for an example, like, yeah, hey, this week I'm good. I can travel. I can travel to California, meet with ministers over there. I can travel to Canada, meet with ministers over there. But this next week, my kids have recitals and I don't want to be traveling around missing them. Or I want to make sure that I'm home here because we have a big town hall thing that we're going to be doing. So I want to make sure I'm home and we prepare for that. So I'm not going to travel. And I think really when it comes to balancing that, I think a lot of it has to do with the director on how good they can manage their time. And not only that, but I think even in some cases, they also have to be able to model that to the rest of their workers. So for an example, if there's a job or if there's a branch of, let's say, global strategies. I'll use that again. And if my buddy Andrew Gale listens to this and he disagrees with me, he can send me an email. He has it. But if everything that global strategies can do, they don't need to be in the office. They could do that in the comfort of their own home and do that remotely. To do that. Like, I mean, as director, I may meet with just Andrew, just give me a report of productivity, how everything's going, how everything's doing. But for the most part, if Andrew and his team can do their job effectively and we don't have to have office space for them, then we don't need office space for them. We could figure out anything like if there's a call and then someone's calling us and we have to forward it from our national offices to their personal cell phone or whatever the case may be, or we have to get like a digital phone number for them to use that they can access. Like we could set that up and do it. So I think in some ways, but then the reason why we're doing that is if there's time where, hey, during the school year, my kids are doing like a fifth grade graduation. I want to be there for my son or daughter's fifth grade graduation. Guess what? Andrew doesn't have to work from like 2:30 to 3:30 in the afternoon because he's going to be taking care of his family. He's going to be there for his kids. And then if he wants to pick that up when his kids are in bed and his wife goes to bed, he wants to take that last hour to do something from like 10:30 to 11:30 before he goes to bed, then yeah, that's fine. As long as he's being proactive in his work and he's being productive in his work, that's fine. And if it's teams like, no, we really want office space, then I'll acknowledge that too. But I want to model good work ethic from not just trying to get everything done, but are you able to balance your faith, your connection time with God, your family, and also the ministry and the work that you're doing for the national office? If you can balance that, that's great. If you cannot balance that, then what we're going to have to figure out is, why can't you balance it? Is it just because you're horrible with time management? Or is it because you have a lot of stuff that you are navigating on your plate, and we need to basically have someone or a couple people come alongside you to get that stuff off your plate so your life can be in balance? And I think as a general director, that's the same thing. Like, if I have a team that I know can do their stuff and can take some of the load off my plate when I need it to be, and I don't have to have my hand in that cookie jar, then I'm going to do that so that I can make sure that I'm able to travel and really pour in and invest in the state leaderships, or to pour into my family, or to go overseas and be able to see our missionary partners over in Germany or over in India, and just be able to say, hey, what are some of the blessings? What are some of the challenges here? I'm just here to encourage you. I appreciate you. I'm going to pray for you. And there it is. And then I can go from there. And if that means that if somebody says, hey, we want you to come speak at our camp meeting, and it's like, no, can do, because it's my family vacation, I'm not going to go do the camp meeting. They make it, but I may say, hey, I can't do that camp meeting, but is there like do you have like a pastor's leadership event in the fall? Then I would come do that. Or, hey, you know what? I can be here for camp meeting next year. So let's book it on the calendar. Next year, I'll be here for camp meeting to speak at your camp meeting. Let's put it on the calendar. I put it in my calendar so I don't put my family vacation on there. And I think it's just more of how we manage our time, and if we're good at that. And if we aren't good at that, is it because people have so much work on their load that we need to offshoot it to other people or hire more people to do that? Or is it something where it's like, well, will they work better if they didn't have to be in the office all the time because they are driving 45 minutes to the office? It's like, well, if they could do their work at home, then that gives them 45 extra minutes that they're not sitting in Indianapolis traffic.
Mm-hmm. Well, I agree with a lot, probably everything you said about that last question, respectfully. Like the idea that like you can offload stuff on people, that's huge. And I know that people don't think that or view that. And like, especially in pastoral ministry, it's like, well, you're the pastor, you should do everything. Well, maybe not. It's not healthy. It's not healthy in the long run. And so that's why you and I are here on this podcast having these conversations, because it's not healthy. And being able to pour into and equip a staff and a team and leadership regionally and abroad, that's why you're in those roles, so that you can cover that part of the country and that part of the world. And I like the idea of like, oh, hey, if my family's booked a vacation this week for this year, if you don't have anybody next year, I would be glad to come and do it.
Yeah.
So those are all the questions I have.
All right. Well, friends, again, we had 2 episodes, one with Micah being general director, one with me being general director. If you have any more questions, you're like, hey, how would you deal with this? How would you deal with that? Go ahead and shoot us in our comment, both the email. You can email us at our website, thescottstedman.com, or you can do what most people do. They watch it on YouTube and they just comment it on the YouTube channel. And then we just kind of read those on air if I'm, up to date with making sure I'm actually checking those. So, friends, thank you so much for listening. I hope you had a wonderful day, and we'll be back with another episode. Take care. Thank you for listening to the Scott Stedman Podcast. The Scott Stedman Podcast is made possible by support from our listeners. We thank listeners like Patty and Scott, whose support goes to this podcast's continual growth and maintenance. If you want to support this podcast, you can do so in a number of ways. First, feel free to give us a 5-star rating if you enjoyed this episode and share it with your friends. If you'd like to financially support the Scott Stedman Podcast, you can go to the website ko-fi.com/the Scott Stedman Podcast. That website again is ko-fi.com/the Scott Stedman Podcast. Thank you so much for listening.